the Instructor Podcast with Terry Cook, talking with leaders, innovators, experts and game changers about what drives them.
Welcome to the Instructor Podcast. This is a show where we help you become an even more awesome driving instructor and run a better driving school. As always, I am your host, Terry Cook. I'm delighted to be even more delighted that you have chosen to listen. And today, we are joined by James Luckhurst, the man behind Project Edward, as we continue our little adventure into Season 7, which is all around road safety. And of course, Season 7 is sponsored by Bright Coaching. To find out more about what Bright Coaching have to offer and how they can help you become a better driving instructor, check out brightcoaching.net. But as I mentioned, we are joined by James Luckhurst today, the man behind Project Edward and the Project Edward podcast. Now, if you are currently not a listener to the Project Edward podcast, I really encourage you to go and check it out. Loads of fascinating guests on there, some of which you will have heard on this show and some of which will be completely new to you. Really encourage you to go check it out. It's titled My Role in the Safe System. So you'll have to search for My Role in the Safe System, or you can use a link in the show notes, but really encourage you to check out that podcast and listen to today's episode because we cover a whole myriad of topics today around the road safety sector, including, and possibly most interesting, James's answer to my question about how much blame can driving instructors take for the actions of their drivers, the learners, after the test. So interesting response to that question from James. But just before we get stuck into that, I want to encourage you to go and check out the Instructor Podcast website, www.theinstructorpodcast.com. Over there, you can find all the previous shows. You can find different ways to listen to the shows, including on YouTube. You can also find all the free resources that I offer. And you can find links to sign up to the WhatsApp channel and email list, as well as checking out all the stuff we have to offer on the Instructor Podcast Premium. And again, that's www.theinstructorpodcast.com. But for now, let's get stuck into the show. So today on the Instructor Podcast, I am joined by one of the most kind-hearted souls you could ever come across in James Luckhurst. How are we doing, James?
I'm well. How are you, Terry?
All the better for seeing your smiley face, obviously. But you're someone that's behind, or at least involved in a lot of different road safety initiatives. Probably the most prominent one being Project Edward. Am I probably right with that? Project Edward being the most prominent?
Yes, I think I'm saddled with it, having dreamt it up in 2015 as a kind of clever, smart-ass acronym, and then thinking, well, that's the solution. Now let's go and find the problem. So, and puts me at odds with any sort of academic developments or resources, but yeah, we do our best.
Well, one of the questions that you often ask your guests on the Project Edward podcast is what's their role in the safe system. So it seems apt to kick off with that today. What's your role in the safe system, James?
I think I can put that really simply. I see my role and the role of Project Edward to share and spread good practice. If it works here, can it work over there? What can we share that we've got? What can we buy and sell to, well, sell, but what can we take and what can we give that can replicate good practice within the bounds of the safe system?
I like it, and you're doing a cracking job because I think the content that you're putting out on the Project Edward podcast, if anyone wants to look for it, you need to search for My Role in the Safe System. But I think that's the best content you put out there, and I think it's the best road safety content available in podcast format anywhere. Who's it aimed at primarily?
That's a very good question. It is aimed at the professional audience because we find it very difficult, as does any resource, really, to sort of go to the public. You've really got to have so much backing and so much kind of funding to put the messages out there. But yeah, we're talking to anyone who's got a role within the safe system. And I suppose I have in my mind perhaps a bitter and twisted financial director from a city council or a county council who's being asked to sign off X number of £1 million to implement a Vision Zero strategy and doesn't really know what Vision Zero is, doesn't know what the safe system is. So it's trying to see and piece together the various components and the people who are involved.
I must admit, it's it's a great listen, and I think it's great for driving instructors as well. Because when I first came across Project Edward, I think I first came across you via the podcast, because I'm a bit of a podcast nut, and they're quite short to the point episodes. They're often sort of 20 to 30 minutes long, and they're great to listen to between driving lessons. So in terms of strategic for driving instructors, it's great, but it breaks down some of that complex terminology. And I think one of the problems that instructors have, and possibly the general public, is that road safety information, it's not always easy to understand. It's often data driven. And I think that the Project Edward podcast does a great job in simplifying that and demystifying some of it. Is that kind of one of the goals?
And definitely humanizing it. It's really important to know what the coroner does, or what the trauma surgeon does, or what the helicopter doctor does, but also what the planning people do, what the engineers do. And I think it's, trying to give it a human face is really important too.
Yeah, I'd agree. And again, I think you do a cracking job with it. And I think that it always makes me chuckle. Well, maybe chuckle's the wrong word, but when I open the podcast up and it'll be like you say, the trauma surgery, it's like, oh, I didn't expect to see that one today. But I want to ask you a little bit about the general public, because like you said, this podcast is aimed more at the road safety professional. But do you think that the general public need to know and understand the safe system? Or do you think that's something that's better aimed at the road safety sector with, a different type of marketing towards the general public?
I have a real problem with the term the general public, because amongst 60 million of us in this country, how many people will have any clue what the safe system is? Very few. How many will want to come home safe tonight? Everyone. But I think that's what we have to kind of unpick it and make it work and put it into action on behalf of loads and loads and loads of people who go about their everyday lives not expecting to get hurt or to hurt anyone else, but for whom road safety is really not something that gets a lot of attention in the course of a day, when there's kids to drop off at school or pick up, there's dinner to be made, and all sorts of things that just have to happen. And I fear that road safety doesn't really figure very highly. And that's why it would be such a mammoth task to put the roads, to put the safe system in front of the general public, as we say. But there's no harm in increasing awareness. The safe system isn't a very good consumer term, but it is good to hear, to have the opportunity to, just for people to reflect on their own vulnerability somehow or other. And if we can perhaps achieve that as a sort of byproduct of what we're doing to a professional audience, then that would be good as well.
So I've asked a lot of people throughout this season of the podcast why the general public don't embrace road safety more. But I want to ask you this. Why do you think more professional drivers don't embrace road safety more? You're someone that's spoken to everyone from sort of high-ranking politicians and parliamentarians to, bereaved families and everyone in between. Why don't professional drivers and government and, the people that should care, that do matter more, that can really get this message across, why don't they embrace it more?
Well, I tell you what, let's talk about two people I met on Saturday afternoon wearing a different hat, because another hat that I wear is a law enforcement hat. So it's a policeman's hat. And I was at the roadside on busy road, which was a 30-mile-an-hour limit. And I met particularly, well, quite a few people, but I met Kate and I met John. And so let's talk about both of them. Kate was doing 40 in the 30-mile-an-hour limit. She had 2 passengers, and I stopped her and talked to her. She produced her driving license. I looked at it, bearing in mind Saturday. What date was Saturday? Saturday was the 21st or the 20th, or around about that time of April. Her license validation started on the 11th of April. She had had a full license 10 days. She had just passed her test. And I had a long conversation with her. And I don't know what went in because she didn't seem particularly bothered about it. Her passengers were giggling. I asked her to step out of the car and talk to her. But I don't know if I made any impact. I thought, using my discretion, that a conversation right there and then would have a longer lasting impact than just taking details, writing out a ticket, and then, the process continuing. She'd get a letter in a couple of weeks' time, and then she'd get points on her license, that sort of. I thought a short, sharp shock. Probably she was very surprised to have met me in that situation. I thought that might have kind of had some impact, but if it did, it wasn't. Perhaps she wasn't a very demonstrative sort of person. So there was Kate, and then 10 minutes later there was John in a great big tipper truck doing 39, and he was furious that I had stopped him. And I think perhaps it's hard to know, I was invading his space. I was interfering with the work he didn't want to be doing on a Saturday afternoon. He drives tipper trucks during the week, and he had to do an extra day, had to do an extra job because some other driver had fallen sick or not turned up or something. But it was all seen through the eyes of just someone, it's his road, his journey. I was in his way. There was no hint of there being, that he might hurt someone else, that someone could be negatively impacted by his choice of speeding. So there's two, the very seasoned professional driver who didn't care, and the novice driver who was clueless. So make of that what you will, Terence.
See, I find that fascinating because often when I hear these stories, the stories about, someone that's a fatal incident or, a crash, we don't often hear the stories of someone breaking the law that hasn't gone drastically wrong, but they've been pulled for it. And so to hear the two different perspectives of when it hasn't gone wrong, because you could rest assured that if one of those had been in a collision, or maybe one of the passengers had died in that first example you said with Kate would have a very different outlook after the outlook for the conversation. So obviously we don't want that to happen, but it's almost like we almost need people to have a near miss or a non-fatal or non-serious collision to get that shock. But obviously we can't have that. But I must admit, when you started talking about Kate, and I realised you were going to say she'd not had a license long, I was panicking, thinking I did have someone called Kate pass fairly recently. And please don't be mine. But that one fascinated me because that's someone that has probably just come away from a driving instructor. If they've had their license 10 days, they probably just come away from a driving instructor. I would be devastated if one of my students did that. So can we apportion any blame of that person's attitude who's just left the driving instructor to the driving instructor?
I can't think that you possibly can. Let's just think, why was Kate speeding? Was she speeding because she was late, in a hurry, because she had to get somewhere? It was as far as I could see, a social, domestic and pleasure journey. She had 2 passengers. So it was probably lack of awareness. She was speeding because she didn't even know that she was speeding. She didn't know what the speed limit was until I stopped her and asked her. And then, she did realize that lampposts were the clue. But I don't think it's anyone's fault but hers. She's now a full license holder. She satisfied an examiner that she could do it. She must have done the theory bits as well. I think she needs to look in the mirror, and I don't think we can possibly blame a driving instructor. Could we blame a wider system for not giving her the breadth of understanding and the perhaps awareness of her own vulnerability and the harm that she could do to others? Maybe that's something we do need to look at within a wider learning program, but it's certainly not the driving instructor's fault, in my humble opinion.
Well, I like that you're not throwing us under the bus there. Maybe that's the wrong phrase to use in this type of podcast, but I like that you're not blaming us. But I do think that as instructors, we need to take a bit of responsibility for what our students do afterwards. I know that if I kind of joke then about could it have been my student, but if that had been my student, I would be looking back and thinking, right, okay, what could I have done different to try and prevent that? So maybe blame was the wrong word, but I do think we need to take some responsibility. But, in that line, talking about driving instructors, I'm keen to get your thoughts on this because you've spoken with quite a few of us. Why is there a disconnect? Because the whole thing around this series of podcasts is bridging the gap between driving instructors and the road safety sector. Now, obviously, there's exemptions to that rule. There are a lot of instructors that do embrace it, but the majority don't embrace the road safety sector, and the road safety sector doesn't always embrace us. So why do you think that gap's there?
I imagine it's because, as with any industry, there are people who are really committed and engaged with the road safety process and take their role within it very seriously. People like your good self, Terry. And there are loads of people like you who are driving instructors. I imagine that there are others who maybe just don't have that same commitment, passion and interest. I tend only to meet the ones who really are passionate and committed and interested and just really want to do the best possible job and see themselves as, contributing to a safer road environment. I don't know driving instructors who think otherwise, but I guess, as with anything, there will be various levels of commitment. Some who may do a certain number of hours a week, and then that will be that, and not look to connect or develop particularly. But that's rude because I don't really know. What motivates individual driving instructors is hard to pin down really. But I know that you're really motivated by the opportunity to mold and shape someone for a lifetime of safe driving and good observation and a kind of proactive approach. But maybe not everybody is, but I'm only surmising.
Well, I was quite lucky. You mentioned me being involved there, but I was quite lucky in the sense of when I first did this podcast way back in season 1, that's when I came across you and interviewed you, and you're someone that kind of opened a few doors for me, and very, very helpful. So if there was a driving instructor listening to this and thinking, I want to get more involved in the road safety sector, what advice would you give to them, or where would you suggest they start?
I would have a look around locally and see if there are things to get involved with. I assume there are local groups of driving instructors that most ADIs would belong to. There are opportunities, make contact with your local authority, whether that's a county council, a city council, I'm not sure, or a road safety partnership. What's going on? Can I help with anything? Are there things that I could be doing? Or suggest specific things. I know we're working with one local authority for a symposium to discuss graduated driver licensing with a kind of student parliament. There'll be debates and a vote, and is that something that should happen? And so that's quite a good way of just see what's going on. If there's not much going on, then you can be the catalyst and you can create things and become that kind of ambassador for the ADIs in your local area. I don't know how if what the national picture is like, but I know there are some areas where it's very busy and lots of connections are taking place, which is great.
See, I think that's a great shout because what I'm doing is reaching out to ADIs nationally, reaching across the board, trying to provide some information and inspiration and that kind of stuff. So I think that's a great shout that for anyone that wants to get involved can look more locally. They'll probably find the local authorities more welcoming and more up for discussion rather than trying to reach out to Rishi Sunak and hoping for the best. But you and I both know that it can be quite demoralizing at times. I'm sure you do. I know I do. Get told no a lot when you're asking for stuff, or even to use this example of this podcast. This current season of the Instructor Podcast, in my opinion, is me producing the best content I've ever produced in a whole myriad of different forms. I've been given that feedback by the people who listen, and I know I've inspired and motivated a lot of listeners. But my listenership is down because it's around road safety. So it is demoralizing then to continue. So I think my question for you is the ADIs that are now starting out that want to go and get involved in the road safety sector, and they, instead of posting on social media, for example, about driving test passes, they post about Project Edward or they post about the honest truth or something like that, and they don't get the same response. How do they keep going? How do they get over that negativity that me and you might face, and we keep going?
It is difficult. I mean, just, I suppose, look at what are you ultimately aiming for is to play your part in a safer road environment where fewer people, or hopefully nobody, is killed or seriously injured. Let that continue to motivate you. My gran used to say, well, one door closes, another one slams in your face. So that's just how it is, folks. But don't give up. Be a force for good, and take those opportunities that you have in a one-to-one environment with young people to motivate them to do the same. Now, I know that's easily said because few will probably, and there will be like Kate, they will get their license and go off and do bad things, but not all of them will. My son, I'm really proud of him. He passed his test in July last year, and really happy to be in the car with him. I know he's got a black box and things, but it's nevertheless, he's embraced the whole safety thing really well. And he to the point that he's critical of his friends who have passed their tests and then find themselves as named drivers on a parent's vehicle, which is far too powerful for them, and that the parent then never drives. You know what I'm referring to here.
Yep.
And cause all sorts of mayhem, or get themselves traffic tickets, or leave the road in a collision. It's pointless, and it frustrates him to see it happening. And I'm proud of him to have that responsible attitude. But that comes from, in part, hopefully, because I've been banging on about it to him for a long time. But I'll give a shout out for Sally Davies, who was his instructor, based in Brecon. And we had, she involved me and William's mother in conversations, so it was sort of like a team effort. We felt that we could help him and be part of it. And because she had that kind of ability to motivate us all, which I hope other families will have benefited from as well. So, great big thumbs up for that.
Well, it takes a brave instructor, I think, to teach a road safety professional's son to drive. But I'm hold on to your son, by the way, because I was speaking recently with Ollie Taylor about the fact that a lot of young people are afraid to call out bad driving in their friends. So it's good that your son's doing that. But the other thing you mentioned there was, you said not all of them will. So there'll be some people that wind up like Kate, but not all of them will. And I think that's what we have to focus on. The people that will then become good drivers, and we just need to make as many of them as we can. But I want to move on. I want to move on to Project Edward in particular, because you've undergone a bit of a change this year. You've gone from having one big event to taking a more consistent approach. So do you want to tell us a bit about that?
I sure can. The Week of Action has been replaced by a year-round program where we'll be focusing on different things during the course of the year, working with some partners and sponsors who will assist us year-round, others who will hop in for perhaps an event or a particular themed month. We'll be supporting the annual calendar of National Police Chiefs Council and the Fire Chiefs Council. So there are specific issues, the fatal for driver vision, motorcyclists, vulnerable road users. We'll be looking at those, but also having a bit more time to dip into issues of, for example, driver well-being, where we're doing something in July on commercial driver well-being, which will involve some activity at motorway service areas and just listening to the issues that commercial drivers have, bringing up experts on different topics that they can consult, having the police there just so that they can have a chat. There's no element of officialdom or enforcement happening, but just sit down, cup of tea with a cop, and just tell them, what it's like, what life's like on the road. And we have found from previous events of that kind that people really value the chance to be listened to.
I like that, because I think you mentioned before about Kate and John in particular. I'm not condoning the speeding, but there's almost, you can almost understand it. Whether you agree with it or not, it's irrelevant to that point. You almost understand that he doesn't want to be working on the Saturday. He's got to do this job he don't want to do. He just wants to get it over and done with and go home. And that stretch of road looks like, well, this should be a 40, so I'm going to do 40. And I think to hear people's reasoning behind that stuff in a non-judgmental way, in that sense, could be really interesting. But tell me a bit more about Project Edward. So for anyone that doesn't know, just tell us a bit about Project Edward, what it stands for, kind of where it came from.
Okay, it stands for Every Day Without a Road Death. And as I was just saying, it's now a year-round calendar. So check out the website, download the calendar, which is a living, breathing document and will be updated regularly with the various events and themes that we'll be exploring during the course of the year. It comes from 2015 when I was out running, and it just popped into my head, and I wrote it down. I thought that's worth looking at. I was working for a European traffic police organisation at the time, TISPOL, European Traffic Police Network. So we started something called European Day Without a Road Death. Project Edward was originally European, and it was one day, and that lasted for 4 years. But in 2019, TISPOL closed and was replaced by a different organisation. So Edward was surplus to requirements. So I took it with me when I finished with TISPOL and launched it in 2020, which was a bad year to try and launch anything. But we've weathered the storm to an extent, and we do have some good plans and good support for 2024.
I'm going to ask you this one, and I ask you this one anytime you come on the podcast. And I think it's relevant because I'm sure it's something you still come across. And anytime I mention Edward, I still get the comments. Every day without a road death is unrealistic, James. Why should we be talking about this?
Because I don't think you can talk about anything else. What's acceptable if other than zero, what's an acceptable number? There isn't one, is there? So we have to try. We have to work together. We have to raise awareness. We're playing a long game. There's so many things that need to change gradually, and it's not going to happen overnight, but it's not going to stop us trying and doing our best to share that the good things that happen in whichever sector, whether that's for young drivers, it could be older drivers at work, whatever part of the road safety mix is of interest. There's so much that needs to be done to allow us to get to a point where zero is a possibility. And the engineering's doing really well, all the technology's great, but there's still us, isn't there? And that we seem resistant to change.
But this is where I'm getting more excited, almost the more I get into this road safety sector and the concepts around it, and in particular safe system, because you've got the 5 components and people is only one of them. So even if you've got the people that aren't embracing it, we're still getting better technology. We still, should be getting better roads, and we should, the post-crash care is always improving. So even if a lot of the people are pulling up, some of the other sectors can pull those forward. And I suppose that's the idea behind the safe system, isn't it?
It is, but we still need, the safer drivers component, safer road users, that has to improve as well. We can't rely on all the other components and not try and improve our own approach and our attitude to risk and our understanding of the things that might hurt us or others. It's so important that we make advances in that as well, because we'll only get anywhere near zero if we have that kind of buy-in from everybody who uses the road to accept their vulnerability.
Going back to Project Edward then, is every day without a road death the ultimate goal? Is that the ultimate goal of Project Edward?
It is, because you can't have anything else. I know that there are 50% reduction by 2030, but that's only on a journey to another 50% and ultimately 100%. Nobody in road safety will say, yeah, it'll be all right. If we've got 1,000 deaths a year is okay, or 100 or 50 or 10. It just isn't okay. We have to keep working for zero.
Tell me about the Project Edward podcast. So my role in the safe system. Talk to me about that.
Well, I don't know what to say. You'll have to tune in and listen, everybody. But it's It's one-to-one conversations with all kinds of interesting people who have some role in the safe system. We've mentioned already the trauma surgeon, the coroner, the helicopter doctor. I think those are the three I mentioned. Elsewhere on it, we've just recently launched the episode with Dr. Gemma Briggs, who was fantastic, talking from the academic point of view about the problem with hands-free phone use. What's in the pipeline? I'm meeting a lady I met a couple of months ago, Laura Laker, who is a journalist and involved with the cycling community, but she's passionate about using the right words. That she gets cross if you see in a newspaper article, a car hit a motorcyclist or a car hit a pedestrian, and she needs that to change. It's not the car, it's the driver that hit them, and it's things like crash not accident is a thing that a lot of road safety organizations embrace, and Project Edward fully embraces that as well. So Laura Laker will be on with us. We've also got a really interesting episode because I tend to do most of the hosting, as you know. You do a bit of it for us, which is grand, but we have an episode coming up soon with a young man called Harrison Kesey, who went to the Transport Research Laboratory. It has a London office, the Smart Mobility Living Lab. Harrison's 22 years old, modern languages graduate, and blind from birth. And he went there to talk to these people who are designing and researching autonomous vehicles and all the things that go with the new mobility and the opportunities coming up. What's in it for him, basically? What can he expect? How can he be sure that it will be safe for him to cross the road when these vehicles are on the road, or to be in one of those vehicles when it's taking him somewhere? Fascinating. Really looking forward to listening to that. We're just putting it together at the moment.
Good stuff. Well, there'll be links for Project Edward and the podcast in the show notes for this. But I want to ask you a question again that you ask a lot of the people on the podcast. So I'll put you under the spot slightly. You're roads minister for a day, James. What changes do you make?
I suppose I'm only allowed one thing, Terry, because I wouldn't have time if I was minister for the day to do more than one thing. I think eyesight. Let's do something that would have a really big impact rather than victimize any one section of the driving public. So I would have much more stringent eyesight testing so that everybody, when you renew your photo card, you have to have an eye test or a certificate signed by an eye health professional that you have good vision. Not just that you can read a number plate at 20 meters, but that all the other things are checked as well. You have a proper eye test every 10 years, and once you reach whatever age we decide at the moment, the big change comes at 70. So when you come to 70 and you renew your photo card license every 3 years, then you get that proper eye test as well going every 3 years. There is just, as an estimate of 10% of drivers have defective vision on the road at any one time. You think how many people that could mean. And there are just too many crashes that occur because somebody didn't see. And there are other reasons, there are the sort of things that go on in our brains which mean we probably see but don't look, or look but don't see, or it doesn't pop up in our brain that something is there when it should do. But the actual inability to read signs, to see hazards, there's no excuse for that, and our system currently is woefully inadequate.
I think that's a great show, and one I wasn't expecting. And also the bugbear of a lot of ADIs, as you mentioned, read a number plate from 20 metres on the day of your driving test, when in theory, you could just go to an optician and get a certificate, which would be a lot more valid. But, why not read a number plate from 20 metres on the day of your test before you go drive someone for the first time?
Exactly.
So, yeah, big thank you today for joining me, James. And I just want to take a moment, actually, before you go to give you a personal thank you, because as I mentioned during the show, that you're someone that has helped me a lot within this sector. You're someone that has opened some doors for me. You have listened to my little moans at times and given me a lot of advice. So when before I asked about what driving instructors could do, I'm going to use you as an example. Find your own personal James Luckhurst. So, yeah, big thank you for joining me today, James. Pleasure as always.
Thank you so much, Terry. All the best.
So a big thank you to James Luckhurst for joining me on today's show. I always love talking to James. I think he's a fascinating bloke who's not backwards and coming forwards. And I particularly liked his viewpoint on what ADIs can do and where ADIs can start. The idea around getting involved locally, I think, is great, because if you look at what I'm doing at the minute, it's very much national. It's very much across the board. You know, I'm trying to get information out to you guys. I'm trying to simplify and demystify some of the stuff that's out there. So for me, as much as you guys, but it's national. So I think there is massive space for people to get involved locally with local projects, you know, and become the heart of the community road safety projects. Get in touch with your local council, get in touch with a local police force or fire service, whatever, and see if you can find out what's going on. If nothing's going on, maybe you could start your own local project. And I just think that, looking at it from a slightly different aspect as well, that puts you as the driving instructor in your area. You know, imagine if you had the council or the police force or the fire service or, you know, whoever it might be, talking about you on their social media, because you're the person that's championing this or starting this or even just supporting these projects. You know, think about how that would change your standing. You could become the road safety driving instructor in your area. And, you know, going forward, I think that'll be a wonderful position to be in. So, yeah, I really would advocate for people doing that. I also want to take a moment to shout out and thank Bright Coaching for sponsoring Season 7. I've said several times how chuffed I am to have Bright Coaching on board as the sponsor of this season, and I stand by that. I think that what Stuart Lockery is doing over there is pretty special. I think the professional diploma, when you look at that, the work and the content and the effort and energy that's gone into creating that, and then I look at the caliber of people who are actually joining that course and gaining that qualification, and then I'll go one step further and look at the feedback that we're seeing from that. I think that's got a big, big future in our industry. And the great thing about Stuart is he will take feedback. So that's only going to get better as people give him feedback. So really excited to see what's coming up there. So highly advise everyone to go and check out brightcoaching.net. Sign up to the newsletter while you're over there so you can keep up to date with everything that's going on. I also want to take a moment to, you know, give a little congratulations to Stuart for his role at the ADI NJC. Stuart recently was made the vice chair at the NJC, and I know how passionate he is about that. And I think that he's someone that can implement and make change. And I think, if we're being honest, we're already starting to see a few of the, maybe not changes, but the influences that he's having over there. So, yeah, I'm excited to see more from Bright Coaching and Stuart, not just at Bright Coaching, but also at the NJC. And just a little mention that members of the Instructor Podcast Premium actually can get a 50% discount on the NJC membership, along with a host of other discounts as well, including things like Bob Morton's client-centered learning. But I advise anyone not to sign up for those discounts. Instead, sign up for the awesome content over there. This month alone, in April, we have had Lee Sperry providing a presentation on lesson planning. We've had Bob Morton talking about coaching within lesson planning, and we've had Chris Spencer delivering a Q&A on lesson planning. All of those have been recorded and are available in the vault. But that's not all, because I've also been talking about alternative routes and the ways you can take your driving school and getting recommendations and reviews and how you can use those reviews to the best effect. Plus, we've done a special bonus edition of Ask Terry, and we're setting a whole host of brilliant questions by a newly qualified ADI that wanted to know how to sort of grow and develop their driving school. So I had a load of fun covering that. So that was just the content for April. And we've got a whole load more coming up for May as well, plus an expert session lined up with Sophie Lydon in June, and then a couple more in July as well, again with Chris Spencer and Lee Sperry. And if you want to sign up, the best place to go is www.theinstructorpodcast.com. You can find out more details over there. And there is a free trial option as well. So there are 2 levels to the membership. There is a £10 level and a £22 level. And the £10 level currently has a 1-week free trial. That is non-committal. Once you've signed up, if you don't like it, you can leave within that week without paying a penny. Although I think the current stat is 98% of people stay, which I'm quite pleased with. But either way, big thank you to you guys for listening. Really appreciate you. As always, come along. And if you are enjoying these shows, make sure you are sharing them amongst your driving instructor colleagues. But for now, let's just keep raising standards.
The Instructor Podcast with Terry Cook. Talking with leaders, innovators, experts and game changers about what drives them.
If you have listened all the way to the end of this episode and hung about for this little bit at the end that I sometimes do, I just want to say thank you. You are a very special listener, and it means the world to me that you have listened to every single second of this episode. So big thank you, and I hope you have a wonderful day.